Welcome to Saint of the Day. Today, July 15th, the Church celebrates Saint Bonaventure of Bagnoregio, known as the Seraphic Doctor. As a young boy, Giovanni di Fidanza, his baptismal name, fell gravely ill. His mother, desperate, brought him to Saint Francis of Assisi, who healed him with a simple touch and, looking at the boy, is said to have exclaimed, "O Bonaventura! Good fortune!" And that is how history came to know him. Years later, now a Franciscan friar, Bonaventure studied at the University of Paris, where he formed a deep friendship with Saint Thomas Aquinas. Together, they defended the right of the mendicant friars to teach and preach, at a time when traditional professors tried to push them out of the classroom. In 1257, at just 35 years old, he was elected to lead the entire Franciscan order, then torn between those who demanded extreme poverty and those who favored a more balanced path. With rare wisdom, he brought peace between the two sides and wrote the official biography of Saint Francis, earning the title, second founder, of the order. Named a cardinal, he was called to lead a council attempting to reunite the Church of the East and the West, and the effort consumed his last strength. He died during the council itself, attended by the Pope, on July 15, 1274. He is the patron saint of theologians and Christian scholars, and his life teaches us that intelligence and humility, wisdom and tenderness, can walk hand in hand. On this same day, centuries later, the Church also honors the sacrifice of a group of young men who gave their lives at sea, blessed Ignatius de Azevedo and his 39 companions, the Martyrs of Brazil. Ignatius was born into Portuguese nobility, in Porto, but gave up his entire inheritance to join the Society of Jesus. After serving in Brazil and seeing firsthand the desperate shortage of missionaries there, he returned to Europe determined to recruit help. He won the support of the King of Portugal and of the Pope himself, who entrusted him with a copy of Rome's most venerated icon, Salus Populi Romani, the image of Our Lady who protects the people. In June 1570, Ignatius set sail with 39 young missionaries. Near the Canary Islands, a storm separated the ship from the rest of the fleet, leaving it exposed to Calvinist corsairs who deeply hated the Catholic Church. When they boarded the ship and recognized the religious habits, they began a massacre. Ignatius, holding the image of Our Lady with both hands, encouraged his young brothers not to fear death, and was thrown into the sea still alive, embracing the sacred image. Only one of them survived, a cook who was spared to be enslaved, and it was he who, years later, told the whole world what happened on that ship. They are the patrons of missionary vocations, and their story reminds us that the courage to proclaim the faith sometimes costs everything, and is still worth it. In a very different way, another saint of this day traded the halls of a palace for the absolute silence of a cave, Saint Rosalia of Palermo, the Hermit of the Plague. Born into one of Sicily's noblest families, Rosalia was raised in the luxury of the court, serving as a lady-in-waiting to a queen. But something about all that glitter left her unsatisfied. Guided by visions of the Virgin Mary, she abandoned everything while still young, wealth, comfort, a guaranteed future through marriage, to live alone, first in a damp cave in the forest, then on a barren, isolated mountain overlooking the sea. There she spent years in prayer and fasting, and died completely forgotten by the world, around 1166. Her story might have ended there, in anonymity, if not for a miracle almost 500 years later. In 1624, a terrible plague was killing the people of Palermo, and Rosalia appeared in a dream to a hunter, revealing where to find her bones, hidden for centuries. When they found them and carried them through the city in procession, the plague stopped overnight. Today she is the patron saint of all Sicily, and an intercessor against disease and epidemics. Her life teaches us that a life given entirely to God in silence, even when no one is watching, is never wasted. God's timing to reveal it may take centuries, but it comes. Also on July 15, the Church recalls one of the most radical conversions in history, Saint Vladimir of Kiev, called the Light of the Eastern Slavs. Before becoming a saint, Vladimir was a brutal ruler. He seized power by killing his own brother, built pagan altars for human sacrifice, and kept hundreds of concubines around him. But needing a faith capable of uniting his vast territory, he sent envoys to investigate several religions up close. When his messengers returned from Constantinople, they reported that, watching the liturgy in a Byzantine church, they could not tell whether they were in heaven or on earth, the beauty was so overwhelming. Vladimir asked for the hand of a Byzantine princess in marriage, accepting baptism as the condition. As he rose from those waters, he was no longer the same man. He destroyed the idols he himself had raised, baptized his entire people in a single day in the Dnieper River, abolished the death penalty, and began distributing food with his own hands to the poor and sick of Kiev. He died on July 15, 1015, already recognized as the spiritual father of an entire nation. He is the patron saint of Russia and Ukraine, and his story proves that no heart is so hardened that God's grace cannot completely transform it. Still on this day, we remember a woman who spent her entire life fighting for the dignity of those no one else would defend, Blessed Anne-Marie Javouhey. She grew up in France amid the terror of the French Revolution, risking her own life to hide persecuted priests and celebrate hidden masses in barns. It was during that dangerous time that she felt called to found a work dedicated to educating the poorest. In 1807, together with her own sisters, she founded the Congregation of the Sisters of Saint Joseph of Cluny, which grew far too quickly to stay only in France. Soon her sisters were serving in Senegal, in Gambia, on distant islands off Africa. But the boldest chapter of her life happened in French Guiana. In 1838, the government entrusted her with 500 slaves who were to be freed. Facing the fury of slaveholding colonists, Anne-Marie created a pioneering system in which the enslaved were educated, taught to read, and trained in trades before receiving full emancipation, proving to the world that freedom, when properly prepared for, produces prosperous, peaceful communities. She died in Paris on July 15, 1851. She is the patron saint of missions and of human dignity, and her life teaches us that defending those pushed to the margins, even against everyone, is one of the most concrete gestures of the gospel. In a very different way, another saint celebrated today spent his whole life inside a confessional, handing out the forgiveness many said people didn't deserve, Saint Pompilio Maria Pirrotti. He was born in the Kingdom of Naples and, still a teenager, entered religious life against his father's plans for him. Ordained a priest, Pompilio lived at a time when a rigorous movement inside the church itself was pushing the faithful away from the sacraments, claiming almost no one was worthy enough to receive communion. He did exactly the opposite. He preached God's mercy with his whole heart, affectionately called the Virgin Mary, Mama Bella, and welcomed the most discouraged sinners with open arms. This way of acting angered some clergy so much that he was expelled from the kingdom by royal decree, reversed only after the people themselves rose up in his defense. He was also known for prophetic gifts. One night, he rang the church bells at dawn, urging people to pray, hours before a devastating earthquake struck the region, sparing the worn city. He died in 1766, right after hearing confessions and beginning to pray vespers. He is the patron saint of those seeking the mercy of forgiveness, and his life reminds us that no one is ever too far from God's love. On this same day, the Church also celebrates a man who defended his city not with swords, but with fasting and prayer, Blessed Ceslaus of Breslau. Born into Polish nobility, Ceslaus was already a priest and doctor of theology when he met Saint Dominic Delaware Guzman in Rome, founder of the newly created order of preachers. He was so impressed that he asked for the habit right there, together with his companion, the future Saint Hyacinth. Back in Eastern Europe, he founded Dominican convents in Prague and later in Breslau, in today's Poland, becoming a great missionary to populations still hostile to the Christian faith. The decisive moment of his life came in 1241, when a Mongol army swept through Poland and laid siege to the city of Breslau, leaving the population in panic. Ceslaus led days of fasting and climbed the city walls with a crucifix in hand, begging for God's help. The chronicles of the time tell of something astonishing. A ball of fire descended from the sky over his head, terrifying the invaders and forcing them to retreat. Regarded as the savior of the city, Ceslaus died the following year, and his cult was officially confirmed by the Church centuries later. He is the patron saint of Breslau and of all who face dangers that seem impossible to overcome. His life shows that prayer, even before the largest army, is never a weak weapon. Still today, the Church recalls a bishop who spent his life protecting his people on the tensest frontier of the ancient world, Saint James of Nisibis. He first lived as a hermit in the arid mountains of Mesopotamia, eating only roots, in a life of penance so radical that his reputation for holiness spread quickly. He was acclaimed Bishop of Nisibis, a fortress city on the border between the Roman Empire and the Persian Empire, and there he founded a theological school that would later train Saint Ephrem the Syrian. He took part in the First Council of Nicaea, in 325, defending alongside Saint Athanasius the truth that Christ is fully God, against those who tried to deny it. But it was late in life that James became legend. When the Persian army laid siege to Nisibis, the whole population begged for his intercession. He climbed the walls under attack and prayed, and, according to tradition, a plague of insects swarmed the Persian camps, driving the war elephants and cavalry mad and forcing the army to retreat. He died shortly after, that same year, revered as the Moses of Mesopotamia. He is the patron saint of those facing sieges and dangers that seem to have no way out, and his life teaches us that the prayer of a single man, with real faith, can protect an entire city. In a very different way, the second-to-last saint celebrated today gave his life to protect not a city, but the sacred books of the faith itself, Saint Felix of Thibiuca. He was an elderly bishop in North Africa when the Roman Emperor Diocletian decreed that all Christian scriptures be confiscated and burned in public. Ordered to hand over his church's sacred books, Felix answered without hesitation, "I have the books, but I will never hand them over. It is better that my body be burned in the fire than to allow the scriptures of the Lord to be." He was placed in chains and sent to Carthage for interrogation, and his firmness only increased the fury of the authorities, who condemned him to be sent to Italy for final judgment. The voyage itself was a torment, for days locked in the hold of a ship, alongside animals, without water or bread. On arriving, he was joyfully welcomed by local Christians, and, still refusing to the end to hand over the Gospels, he was beheaded. With his blood, he ensured that the sacred scriptures kept reaching us. He is the patron saint of those who defend the Word of God, and his life reminds us that some things are worth resisting for to the very end. And closing today's list, the Church celebrates an English monk who traded the safety of a monastery for the ice and hostility of the far north of Europe, Saint David of Vesteros. Living peacefully as a Benedictine abbot, he learned that the nephews of a missionary had been brutally murdered by pagans in Sweden, and, instead of feeling fear, he decided to go there himself, to that hostile land. He settled in a Swedish village called Munktorp, and he didn't try to convert anyone by force, he converted through humility, constant prayer, and charity. That is how, without violence, he helped dismantle old pagan shrines and became the first bishop of the Diocese of Vesteros. One of the most beloved miracles told about him says that, already elderly and with failing eyesight, he entered the church to pray and, fooled by the dim light, tried to hang his heavy gloves on what he thought was a hook, which was, in fact, a ray of sunlight coming through a crack in the ceiling. And the glove stayed there, suspended in the air, held up by the light. He died of old age, surrounded by the respect of the very people who had once opposed the faith he brought. He is the patron saint of evangelizing difficult lands. And if Saint David's story reminded you of someone, or if any of these 10 saints touched your heart in a special way, follow along here on Saint of the Day, comment asking for the intercession of one of them for someone you love, and share this video with someone who needs to hear this message today, because every share like that is, truly, a small act of evangelization. The full prayer to each of today's saints is in the description of the video.